بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
لا ضرر ولا ضرار. عن أبي سعيد سعد بن سنان الخدري رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: لا ضرر ولا ضرار.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن Today, inshallah, is Hadith number 32 of al-Wali, and this particular Hadith is probably the shortest one of al-Wali. This is a Hadith that is reported by Ibn Majah and al-Daraqutni. But in fact, Ibn Majah did not report this particular Hadith or from this particular Sahabi. Daraqutni reported it from Abi Sa'id al-Khudree radiallahu anhu. Abi Sa'id Sa'd ibn Malik al-Khudree radiallahu anhu. That the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, La darara wa la dirar. Would it be hard for you to remember this hadith? That's it, that's the hadith. La darara, there should be no harm. Wa la dirar, or reciprocation of harm. The translation is a little bit tricky because there are different meanings for la darar wa la dirar, which we will go over inshallah. So it's not just no harm and no reciprocation of harm. But this is basically a translation that is dependent on one interpretation of this hadith. But there are many interpretations of la darar wa la dirar. There should be no darar, harm, or dirar, which could be reciprocation of harm, but it could be other things as well. So, most of the stuff that I will say will be in Jami' al-Ulum al-Hikam. Jami' al-Ulum al-Hikam by Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali is the compendium of knowledge and wisdom. It is in the library for those of you who want to read on these hadiths. The book is present in the library in English, Compendium of Knowledge and Wisdom. Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, commented on, al-Nawawi rahimahullah saying, La darar wa la dirar was reported from Abi Sa'id al-Khudree radiallahu anhu by Ibn Majah and al-Daraqutni. And Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali in Jami' al-Ulum al-Hikam, which is a commentary on this hadith, he pointed out that Ibn Majah did not report this hadith, that it was only Daraqutni. However, it is not like Ibn Majah did not report la darar wa la dirar. Ibn Majah did report la darar wa la dirar from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but Ibn Majah did not report la darar wa la dirar from the Prophet through Abi Sa'id al-Khudree. He reported it through Ubadah ibn Samit and Abdullah ibn Abbas. He reported through Ubadah ibn Samit and Abdullah ibn Abbas. So you may want to say, when you first read it, so you'll say, why are you picking on him? At the end of the day, the Prophet ﷺ said, La darar wa la dirar. Daraqutni reported it. Ibn Majah reported it. If Ibn Majah reported it from a different Sahabi, it's not such a big deal. Why do you have to point out that Imam Nawawi said that Daraqutni and Ibn Majah reported it, but Ibn Majah had reported it from a different route? It does not at all mean that the scholars want to pick on each other, or that the scholars want to show their, esteemed knowledge or, precision. It just means that the scholars were extremely committed to the authenticity of, and the sort of, to the preservation, the process of preservation of this deen. So no one is above being corrected. Everybody stands to be corrected, including Nawawi. Well, Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali and Nawawi are both great imams. huge Imams. And in Nawawi, Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali would not comment on the 40 hadith selected by Nawawi and write a book on the sharh or the explanation of those 40 hadith until he holds Nawawi in high esteem and he wants to serve his collection. And Jami' al-Ulum al-Hikam happened to be, or the Compendium of Knowledge and Wisdom, happened to be the best book, the best explanation of the earlier scholars of those 40 Ahadith of Imam Nawawi. So it just means that their commitment to the deen and to the preservation of the deen was greater than anything else, with greater than their basically love for each other. It doesn't detract from their love. The fact that, you know, I'm correcting another scholar does not detract from my love for this other scholar, but it has to be understood in this context, because over exaggeration in our love or respect for the scholars that will prevent us from preserving the deen and point out inconsistencies, even if they were little, even if they were very small. That is you know, not praiseworthy. That is not good love, because our love for the deen and the integrity of the deen and the purity of the deen should take precedence over our love for each other. Because without our love for this deen, we would have not had each other to love, right? Because what's the common denominator between us all? It is just this deen. So without our love for this deen and our respect for this deen, our relationship will have to end. Or would be very, very flimsy, very trivial, very you know, insignificant. Because it is our love for this deen that makes us love one another, because that's the only common denominator between us. I just wanted to point this out in the beginning of the talk, because it is very important that we understand that respect for the scholars never means just to keep silent if you notice some inconsistency or some error. It means that you point out the error or inconsistency if you're sure, if you're certain of the inconsistency or error, if you are at that level and you're certain and all of that all of this is certainly a given, then you point it out with respect, with love and respect, which is very fine. You could even point out to your parents some error or inconsistency with love and respect. Like if your parents, make a mistake, or they gossip, or they backbite, or they do the things that all of us do every once in a while to various extents, then you could point it out to them. You could say that, Allah, I don't think that this is pleasing to Allah and His Messenger. Certainly, you can't go beyond this with your parents. You cannot rebuke them. You will just point it out. My beloved mother or father, I don't think that this is right to say that about aunt so and so, or uncle such and such. Anyway, so Ibn Rajab pointed out that Ibn Majah did not report this hadith from Abi Sa'id al-Khudree, rather he reported it from Abdullah ibn Abbas and Ubadah ibn Samit. So we have this hadith now being reported from Ubadah ibn Samit, Abdullah ibn Abbas, and Abi Sa'id al-Khudree. Daraqutni reported it from Abi Sa'id al-Khudree with a chain that is Hasan, sound acceptable. That the Prophet ﷺ said, La darara wa la dirar, there should be no harm nor reciprocation of harm. We said before in our Saturday classes that this hadith is one of 5 legal maxims. قاعدة فقهية كلية كبرى, قواعد فقهية كلية كبرى, legal maxims, comprehensive major legal maxims. So I want to be reminded of those 5 legal maxims. It means what? It means that those things are overarching. They are overarching throughout the whole fiqh. They are dominant qualifiers of the rest of the ahadith or the reports. dominant qualifiers. You have to understand the rest of the hadith and reports. You have to understand the deen. You have to understand fiqh in light of these dominant, overarching qualifiers of the entire deen. 5. One of them is la darar wa la dirar, and it is number 4. What's number 1? Al-umur bi-maqasidiha or al-a'mal bin-niyat, which means deeds are judged by their intentions, or deeds are according to their intentions. Deeds are judged by their intentions. So the intent is more important than the deed itself, because the intent, a bad intent would ruin your deed, no matter how good the deed is. So deeds are judged by the intentions. That is number 1. What's number 2? Al-yaqeen la yazul bil-shak. Certainty is not negated by doubt. All of the deen has to be understood within the context of, al-umur wa maqasidha. Deeds are judged by their intentions. Al-yaqeen la yazul bil-shak. Certainty is not negated by doubt. Certainty is not negated by doubt. Once you have established certainty, let not the doubt remove that certainty. Don't act on certainty. Don't proceed on the basis of, on the basis of doubt when you have certainty. You have to proceed on the basis of that certainty until there is another certainty that will remove that first certainty or erase it. The same applies to people that doubt Islam. If you have friends, or you just remind them, you had certainty in the deen before you doubted the deen. Did you reach certainty to leave it? Because I know that some of you will be shocked that some people actually leave Islam. Yes, some people do, and some of our youth do, and it's not big news. You all know that some do. But one of the ways that you could approach those people is just to remind them of the logical maxim. This is not just a fiqhi maxim. These should be logical maxims. Certainty should not be negated by doubt, should not be erased by doubt. You had certainty first. Wait until you have certainty. And I'm sure that if you waited, you will never leave, because you will not have certainty. You will have to look at your original certainty, build on it, examine why you had certainty. Examine why your parents had certainty in this deed. Examine it first, give it time to examine it. Examine the cause of your doubt, ask around. If you ask the imam of your book at Masjid and he doesn't give you a satisfying answer, don't rush to conclusions. Find someone else to ask. You should approach the people and you should tell them these things, because there are some people that are actually walking away, and it is our responsibility to bring them back. And you can't always bring them back by scaring them back, or frightening them back, or embarrassing them back, because they may get embarrassed and pretend to be back and they're not back. Anyway, second one is al-yaqeen la yazul bil-shak. Certainty is not negated by doubt. What's the third one? Al-mashaqqa tajlib al-taysir, which means, hardship. Al-mashaqqa is hardship. Tajlib brings about, begets, warrants, calls for, requires. At-taysir is facilitation. So al-mashaqqa tajlib al-taysir would be hardship, warrants, the making of concessions, or calls for facilitation, begets facilitation, and so on. So al-mashaqqa tajlib al-taysir is also another concept in our religion. مَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيَجْعَلَ عَلَيْكُم مِّنْ حَرَجٍ. Allah said in Surah Al-Ma'idah Allah does not want to cause hardship to you. ما يريد الله ليجعل عليكم من حرج. Allah does not want to cause hardship to you. يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر. Allah wants ease for you, yusr, and does not want hardship for you, usr. So that is the third legal maxim. And we said those legal maxims mean that they are the threads that connect all the pearls of fiqh. So you will not be able to understand fiqh and enjoy it. You will not be able to interpret fiqh wisely unless you have understood these legal maxims and you take them with you in your journey through fiqh, through the study of fiqh, the study of the rulings. Then number 4 is there should be no harm or reciprocation of harm. And number 5 is al-'adat muhakkama, which means that customs are considered, they're given consideration. Muhakkama means, customs have authority. Customs are given consideration anyway, is good enough. Customs are considered or given consideration. And this is also huge for the scholars to consider this, which tells you of the flexibility of this religion, tells you of the great flexibility of this religion. You see, in the tradition of Hanafi fiqh, for instance, a mosque should not have any buildings on top of it or underneath it. Should have no rooms on top of it or underneath it that belong, that do not belong to the masjid. No rooms. So if you have rooms on top of the masjid, those rooms will take the same ruling of the masjid. Unless, as Ibn Abdin said in Hashiyah, he basically designated a room on top of the masjid for the imam to live in. But in general, a masjid waqf should not have something on top of it or below it. And this is the position of Abu Hanifa and Imam Hanifa and Imam Muhammad, who is the second of the disciples, the younger of the disciples. Abu Yusuf, because Abu Yusuf lived in Baghdad, Abu Yusuf is of the same school. He's actually the elder of the disciples. But when he felt that Baghdad has become so crowded, he allowed them to have masjids that have rooms or basically stores or houses underneath it or above it. Otherwise, you will have less masajid, because Baghdad has become so crowded and it's like a big city and people are having multiple stories on top of each other. And if we make it a condition that the masjid will not have anything above it, then we will have less masajid. And in this way, what our attempt to glorify the symbols of Allah, the masajid, the symbols of Allah, will cause us to basically neglect the prayer and the dhikr for which the masajid are built, or the masajid are meant for the prayer and dhikr. So Abu Yusuf said, no, let us, which means what? It is understanding of the people's norms. This is a city where all the houses here have many stories, so it is okay to make the masjid, the second or the third flight, to make a waqf of the second or third flight as a masjid and have something underneath it, or be the first and then have something on top of it, which is what we call fiqh al-waqa to some extent. Basically the fiqh of reality, the fiqh of the context, the context that you live in. because those ahkam do not operate in a void. They have to operate within a certain context. So knowing that context is important. Knowing the customs of the people, knowing the norms of life is important when you make those ahkam. And that, you will find this in all of the mazahib. They readjust their fatwa on the basis of new contexts, new circumstances, without compromising the clear text of revelation. Because there is no clear text of revelation that said the masjid, there should be nothing on top of the masjid or nothing below the masjid. So I was reading this and I was thinking to myself, if they just came and someone had it, they would decide that you could have it anywhere. Because like one building could have how many things, like thousands. Okay, so al-'ada muhakkama, customs are given consideration. The norms of people are given consideration in making the ahkam. If the people consider, walking to the minaret to be, if the minaret is far enough from the masjid that the people would consider it to be outside of the masjid, then the minaret is not part of the masjid. It is based on people's customs and people's norms. So these are the 5 most important legal maxims. If you understand them well, you understand fiqh well. Being legal maxims, qawaid fiqhiyya kulliyya kubra, comprehensive and major, means that they're overarching and they're dominant qualifiers of the rest. So take la darar wa la dirar, it is a qualifier of the deen, our understanding of the deen. One of the qualifying texts of our understanding of the deen is la darar wa la dirar. You take it from the very beginning of the deen, from wudu. Does la darar wa la dirar have room here? Yes. If the doctor told you don't get this wet, don't get it wet. La darar wa la dirar. If you can't make ghusl, don't make ghusl. Make tayammum. La darar wa la dirar. If you can't pray sitting or you can't pray standing, although it's a rukn, it's a pillar, but don't worry. La darar wa la dirar. If you, Shaqat al-Taysir has to do with this also, but this has to do when it causes darar. When it causes harm, not just mashaqqa, but when it causes harm, the harm is removed. So la darar wa la dirar means la darar is the noun, dirar is the verb, right? So la darar means there is no harm. What does it mean? There is no harm, period? No, there is harm, but there is no harm in this deen. That's what it means. So whenever there is harm, it is removed from this deen. There is no harm in this deen. La dirar, there should be no harming. You should not harm others. That's one understanding of the difference between darar and dirar. One is the noun, darar, means there is no harm. So since there is harm in the dunya, it means here, in this deen, there is no harm. All harm is removed. The noun was used to say all harm is removed from this deen. La dirar is you should not harm one another. You should not cause harm to others. The other meaning of la darar wa la dirar is la darar would be no harm. Darar is the harm that you inflict on others for your own gain. So you're competing with others, and you're competing with someone, you push them away so that you get ahead. You're inflicting harm for your own gain. Dirar is harm that you inflict on others for no gain. You're not getting anything, but you just want to hurt them. That's called what? Sadism. So the scholar said that darar is when you inflict harm on others for your own manfa'a. Dirar is when you inflict harm on others for no manfa'a, for no benefit that you accrue at all. The other explanation of la darar wa la dirar is that darar is to instigate harm, dirar is to reciprocate harm. So la darar, no instigation of harm, la dirar, no reciprocation of harm. No reciprocation of harm does not mean that you should not take revenge in a just and fair way. It just means that you don't cause, like if I come and slap your child on the face, you don't slap my child on the face. That is reciprocating harm in a way that is impermissible, because your child has nothing to do with this. But you should take me to the judge, and complain. If I burn your field, your corn crops, then you don't go and kill my livestock. Take me to the judge, and the judge will make me pay for what I have done. That is what it means. No instigation and no reciprocation. But the reciprocation is not the fair وَإِنْ عَاقَبْتُمْ فَعَاقِبُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا عُوقِبْتُمْ بِهِ وَلَئِنْ صَبَرْتُمْ لَهُ خَيْرٌ لِلصَّابِرِينَ, for sure. And if you avenge yourself, do it equitably or fairly. وَإِنْ صَبَرْتُمْ, and if you stay patient, or if you keep patient or be patient, then it is better for those who are patient. But la darar wa la darar has all of those meanings. We were talking about la darar wa la darar being a qualifier, and we said it is throughout the fiqh. Go anywhere in fiqh, point to any ahkam and say, can we apply la darar wa la darar here? There should be no harm or reciprocation of harm. Could we apply it here? Could we apply it here? You will find it is applied in all of the ahkam of this deen. When we go to birr al-walidayn, we say what? Birr al-walidayn, there is nothing that is more emphasized than birr al-walidayn, other than tawheedullah. So birr al-walidayn comes after tawheedullah. Worship Allah alone and be good to your parents. But be good to your parents has a ceiling of la darar wa la dirar. Has this ceiling of la darar wa la dirar also. Being good to your parents has this ceiling, la darar wa la dirar. There should be no harm or reciprocation of harm. So if your parents tell you to do something that will cause you harm or cause someone else harm, don't do it. Even if it will cause you personally harm and not someone else, you don't have to do it. Because there is la darar wa la dirar, there should be no harm or reciprocation of harm. And wherever you go in the deen, there should be no harm or reciprocation of harm. Now this does not mean that you become your own mufti and you say, well, take this out, don't do this, this is a harm. No, it means that the scholars do this work. It means that the deen came without harm, and that whenever exceptionally the harm ensues, and exceptionally because of some of the rulings of this deen, the scholars, this would warrant for the scholars making concessions, to remove the harm. So in a Sunan, Uqba ibn Amir says that his sister made nadhr to walk to al-Masjid al-Haram. His sister, Uqba ibn Amir al-Ansari from Medina, his sister from Medina, she made nadhr, she vowed to walk to al-Masjid al-Haram. Nadharat an ta'ti al-bayta mashiya. So she made nadhr to walk to al-Masjid al-Haram, and the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said to Uqba ibn Amir, مر أختك أن تركب فإن الله لغني عن عذابها. Tell your sister to ride, for Allah does not need her suffering, or Allah is not in need for her suffering. And this was also reported about another man during the time of the Prophet ﷺ who made the same vow to make Hajj to the Masjid al-Haram, to make Hajj walking. So the deen itself came with no harm, but if due to certain circumstances, the rulings cause harm, then the scholars, it is the work of the scholars to basically ease this hardship so that no harm ensues for ibadullah. The same applies, so we have very, very powerful, the flexibility of this deen is enormous. The scholars, for instance, you find like Suyuti in Ashwah al-Nadha'ir, it's a book about legal maxims also, talking about al-Hajat and al-Darurat, and he's talking about al-Haja al-Amma tanzil manzilat al-Darura al-Khassa. He's talking about, you see how the scholars, they also have the ability of foreseeing troubles. So al-Haja al-Amma is the public need. It will be treated like an individual necessity, because we know darurat in Islam, necessities in Islam will make concessions, will make haram permissible because of the darura, because of the necessity. You could drink wine or eat pork if you're about to die of starvation, things like that. It's called necessity. But the scholars also said that if you have haja amma, public need, we will treat it like an individual necessity. The Imam al-Juwayni, Imam al-Haramain, rahimahullah, says because لأنه يدخل على المكلفين من الضرر والمشقة بترك الحاجة العامة ما يدخل على أحد الناس بترك الضرورة الخاصة أو كما قال. Because the hardship that will ensue by the people being barred from their public needs, their needs. If this is like a public thing, the harm that will ensue will be equal to or greater than the harm that will ensue from an individual leaving out his darura or the necessity. So for an individual to leave out the darura, it will cause a little bit of harm, or some harm, great harm for that individual. But if the entire community is barred from some of their needs. You want some examples, right? Because otherwise, I know you're looking like you want some examples. I was trying to find a different example. Because the example is a little bit controversial. But it is our position anyway. Like in AMJA, Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America, that the ownership of houses is a public need for the Muslim community in the West. And to bar them from this need will cause harm that is greater than barring an individual from a necessity. Because the harm here is multiplied by the number of people affected. So it causes great harm for the ummah that is greater than basically the harm that you as an individual will suffer from darura, from leaving out the darura or the necessity. It's like when we say in the retirement plans, if we say to all of the Muslims, don't contribute, because there is some riba involved in the retirement plans somewhere eventually somewhere in the process there is riba involved. But if we tell all the Muslims don't contribute, and the companies where all the Muslims in the West, Australia, UK, USA, Canada, even in some of the Muslim countries now where they basically adopt the Western system as it is and they just take it and use it. If you tell the Muslims all over the place don't contribute, then you can imagine the loss to the Muslims in general that they will have to endure by their companies not matching their contributions. Because if you don't contribute to those plans, the companies do not match this contribution, right? Because companies don't match. If you don't contribute, and they are happy with that because they don't have to pay.
Yeah, they don't.
10%.
Yeah. So the idea here is, this becomes a haja amma to basically make room for people to contribute. And in this case, after you have said all of this, then you tell them that you have to do your best in having your isolated portfolio. An isolated portfolio means that you will have to handpick the companies that you will invest in. If you can have this isolated portfolio, go ahead and have it. And if you can't have it, then we will tell you, select the mutual funds that are most aggressive, because those have the least riba, in them. They don't have fixed interest. Select the companies that invest in utilities and companies that invest in the technology sector and so on and so forth. Do your best. And at the end of the day, when you retrieve some of this investment, purify it by giving a lot in charity so that you will have purifier in your remains. But, so the scholars anyway, they say that the darar that will be caused by telling all the Muslims to not partake in these plans will be huge darar, even if it is not for the individual considered a necessity, it is for the community considered the public need, that if we bar the community from it, it will cause a lot of harm. Multiply the harm that is caused by every individual, by the number of people affected, and that is what we mean by al-Haj al-Amal anzal manzilat ad-darura khassa, or the public need takes the place of the individual necessity. That is what our great predecessors, Salaf, Allah, عليه, Salaf min al-ulama does not necessarily mean the righteous first three generations, so don't frown. It means our predecessors, before us. It does not have to mean always the first three generations. But so they made those rulings, all of these, basically to remove harm. They were even not only aware and conscious of the harm, the individual harm or the severe harm. They wanted to remove all harm. So if the harm is a collective harm, it's a harm for the community, they also wanted to remove this. So la darar means that this deen has no harm. That does not mean that there is no effort in this deen whatsoever. There is because you wake up in the morning and you make wudu, that sounds to some people hard. We're talking about real harm. We're talking about harm that will cause you harm, not harm that you perceive to be harm. Because if it is left to your perception, some people will think that waking up in the morning is harmful. Some people will think that fasting in Ramadan is harmful. Some people will think but it means that deen itself came without harm. This deen has no harm. And whenever there is a difficulty in some of the rulings, this difficulty is that the benefit in this ruling far outweighs the difficulty in it. All the way up to jihad, where the difficulty seems to be huge, but the benefit far outweighs the difficulty. Imagine any country in this world that decided, imagine if the USA decided that we will have no concept of jihad. The USSR would have certainly overrun it, or even Russia now, not the USSR. Any country that would say there is no such thing called jihad, it will be defeated and overtaken by other countries. It will be abused and exploited by other countries because they will not defend their interests. They will not defend their interests. And not defending their interests is not even limited nowadays to defending your interests inside your borders. Is anyone limiting it to this? Limiting, basically defending your interests within your borders? No. Countries go out all the time to defend their interests outside of their borders. So can you imagine if any society, if any community, if any state, if any country throughout this history said X jihad, no jihad. Look at the history of this world. Had any company said X jihad, had any nation said no jihad, this nation would have been gone. Their culture would have been, completely wiped out. They would have been erased from the history. So even there, when there is some difficulty, like obvious difficulty in some ruling, be certain that the benefit in this ruling far outweighs that difficulty. Had it not far outweighed that difficulty, it would have not been legislated for us, because in this deen there is no darar, la darar, there is no harm. But life is not it's not one-dimensional. Life is not always that simple. Life is complex. So there is always a mixing of benefit and harm. And al-aqil, or the wise person, is the one who knows the better of the two good things and the worst of the two evil things. Anyway, so la darar wa la dirar means this deen has no darar, and it means that we should not instigate harm or reciprocate harm. We should not instigate harm or reciprocate harm for our benefit or for no benefit. Some of the examples that Ibn Rajab gives on harm for no benefit, sadism, these examples have to do with, most of them have to do with family relationships. And I really, when I was reading this, I noticed that most of the examples of sadism have to do with families. Because this is really true. Because when family relationships turn sour, particularly between the spouses, all they think of is revenge. All they think of is hurting one another, which is amazing. That's why Allah tells them, وَلَا تَنْسَوُا الْفَضْلَ بَيْنَكُمْ, and do not forget graciousness amongst yourself. Like you were at one point one family. So how do you become this way? So the examples would be like, al-mudarra fil wasiyya, for instance, which is in many ayat in Surah An-Nisa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions wasiyya, and Allah says غَيْرَ مُضَارٍ, without harm, So in writing your bequests, cause to write your bequest intending any harm for anyone of your survivors, or any harm for anyone in general, then that is of the darar that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade. Abdullah ibn Abbas even says that after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about the wasiyya, Allah said, وَمَا يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَيَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَهُ يُدْخِلْهُ نَارًا خَالِدًا فِيهَا وَلَهُ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. And whoever disobeys Allah and His messengers and oversteps the bounds of Allah, Allah will enter him into nar to abide therein forever, خَالِدًا فِيهَا وَلَهُ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. And he will have this disgraceful punishment, torment. So Abdullah ibn Abbas said this means that it is a kabira to harm someone in your wasiyya. Harming someone in your wasiyya means to give someone your money so that your wife doesn't get it, or so that your kids, or so that your natural heirs do not get it, or to give one of your natural heirs more money, or to pass some money to them on before, so that they to basically play God. This is what it is. It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that determined the shares. So if you start to take Allah's place, then that is a kabira. You're overstepping the bounds, and you're bound to a great punishment. To the point where Abu Hurairah said, and it is, also reported traceable or marfu' to the Prophet that a man will worship Allah for 60 years and then he will cause harm in writing his bequest and then he will deserve to be in the hellfire. So after he worshipped Allah for 60 years, he comes at the end and causes harm in writing his bequest, dividing his inheritance, and then he will be deserving of the hellfire. The other examples is basically al-ila, al-Raja. Al-Raja is when you return your wife after divorce. They used to do this. They divorced and then they would return the wife, and then they divorced and then they return the wife to cause the wife harm. So before the iddah ends or the waiting period ends, they would bring her. So they will take her back, and then after some time they will divorce her, and then so on, to cause harm. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَأَمْسِكُوهُنَّ بِمَعْرُوفٍ أَوْ سَرِّحُوهُنَّ بِمَعْرُوفٍ وَلَا تُمْسِكُوهُنَّ ضِرَارًا لِتَعْتَدُوا فَأَمْسِكُوهُنَّ بِمَعْرُوفٍ. Then keep them in kindness or release them in kindness. أَوْ سَرِّحُوهُنَّ بِمَعْرُوفٍ وَلَا تُمْسِكُوهُنَّ ضِرَارًا لِتَعْتَدُوا. And do not keep them to hurt them, to harm them. وَمَنْ يَفْعَلْ ذَلِكَ فَقَدْ ظَلَمَ نَفْسَهُ. And whoever does this had caused himself a great injustice. Caused himself. فَقَدْ ظَلَمَ نَفْسَهُ, caused himself. He caused someone else great injustice. But before you cause anyone great injustice, you're causing yourself a great injustice. Because guess who will be your opponent now? It's Allah that will become your opponent. That is why Abu Sirma radiallahu anhu related from the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam this hadith, which Tirmidhi reported and said it was Hasan, in which the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man darra, darra Allahu bihi, wa man shaqqa, shaqqa Allahu alayhi." So whoever causes harm, Allah will cause harm to him. And whoever causes people hardship, Allah will cause hardship to him. So you have to have this understanding, because it is so amazing. We will not rise as an ummah unless we take these things very seriously, unless there is no harm between us, or it becomes very rare and limited. But is it very rare and limited? Sometimes you look at us Muslims and you think that if you take some of these verses in the Quran and apply them to us, they will actually fit very, very well. وَلَتَجِدَنَّهُمْ أَحْرَصَ النَّاسِ عَلَى حَيَاةٍ وَمِنَ الَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا. If you take this verse and you try to fit it to us, it will fit very well. وَلَتَجِدَنَّهُمْ أَحْرَصَ النَّاسِ عَلَى حَيَاةٍ, and you will find them to be most, keen on life, keen on money, keen on, power, keen on all of these things, keen on celebrity, keen on status. وَلَتَجِدَنَّهُمْ أَحْرَصَ النَّاسِ عَلَى حَيَاةٍ. These are the elements of life that are dispraised. This was a description of the Jews. And you will find them to be most keen on life, which means keen on money, keen on power, keen on status, keen on celebrity, keen on all of these. وَمِنَ الَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا, even more than the mushrikeen. Like they have their greed for life is even more than the mushrikeen. Well, sit down and think about it. If you apply it to us, does it fit? You'll find that it does fit. And if you look around you look at our transactions with each other as Muslims, and you find that yes, it is really true that we look like this. That applies to us. So that's why Hudhayfa radiallahu anhu said, "La wallahi laysat kullu murratin lahum wa kullu hulwatin lakum." Nay, by Allah, if you do like they did, the same verses will apply to you. Not every sour one is for them, and every sweet one is for you. Not every sour, ruling or parable is for them, the Jews and Christians, and you Muslims will luck out just by the name of being Muslims. Whatever applies to them applies to you. So these are principles and foundations of the deen. If we don't apply them, and you keep on coming back and forth to the masjid and growing your beard and acting like, someone righteous, someone religious, And our greed makes us hurt one another. Our greed makes us, our anger, our vengefulness makes us want to hurt one another, even spouses, even siblings. They have no, sometimes when you sit down with these people after, particularly after divorce and something, they act like this is going to be their primary business for the rest of their lives. How could I get back at him or her? This is the primary business, primary concern. It is not even enjoying the dunya. So your primary concern should be pleasing Allah and getting to Jannah. But for some people it is enjoying the dunya, and this is like an inferior one. But for them this is just like a terrible, disastrous one. If your primary concern now is to hurt your ex, this is just terrible life. So you're not given any enjoyment here or there. Okay. So talaq, dirar fi talaq, which is harm in divorce, harm in raja, in returning, harm in ila, which is the abandonment of the wife, harm in all of these things. This is basically harm for no return, harm for no return, for no benefit. It's just wanting to hurt other people. Uqba ibn Amir also, he has this hadith, this beautiful hadith, that without this hadith, without applying this hadith, we will really never experience the sweetness of faith. It is reported by Imam Ahmad in his Musnad. He said, Ya Uqba ibn Amir, sil man qata'ak, wa a'ti man haramak, wa'afu amman asa'a ilayk. Uqba ibn Amir, join those who cut you off, and give to those who deprive you or withhold from you. Wa'afu amman asa'a ilayk, and forgive those who hurt you. Without trying to do this to our best capacity, you will never taste the sweetness of faith, and everything will be for you a bargain, will be like a cheap transaction, and you want to get over and you want to get on top, or at least everything for you will be bickering, and being so confined within the rights and obligations. Rights and obligations are very confining. It is important to understand rights and obligations, but once you become so literate, understand that you will never be able to be just if you become so literate in your understanding of rights and obligation. You will have to leave room for graciousness. You will have to leave room for fadl, for graciousness, for extra kindness, to forgive those that hurt you. And then you will enjoy having that sweetness of bond with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you will be one of His. And whatever you miss out on in this life, because you're not competing, because you're not fighting back, you will be compensated by Him in huge and great ways. So,
Can you repeat the hadith? What's the name from Imam Ahmad?
يا عقبة بن عامر سل من قطعك وأعطي من حرمك واعفو عمن أساء إليك. Join those who cut you off, and give to those who deprive you, and forgive those who hurt you. Now, the scholars said that some of the darar is this sadistic darar, which usually has to do with relationships and so on. It is just to want to inflict harm without even benefiting yourself. But some of the darar is not that. Some of the darar is when you want to. Some of the darar is basically coincidental. It just so happens in your competition for limited finite resources. People have infinite greed, finite resources. In this competition, we tend to push one another because you want more. So the finite resources in this life and the infinite greed, we are always trying to push one another. And this is where a lot of harm also ensues. And they give so many examples. You know, there are so many examples that you could think of, right? When you cause harm for your own benefit, you cause harm to others for your own benefits. But sometimes it may not even be that you will transgress. It may not even be that you will go beyond your limits. But even if you cause harm without going beyond your limits, that harm has to be removed. But how is this? So the Prophet, for instance, as reported by Bukhari and Muslim, and from Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, لا يمنعن أحدكم جاره من أن يغرز جذوعه في جداره أو كما قال. So let none of you prevent his neighbor from using his wall to lay down his lugs, wood lugs, for the ceiling. If we have a wall, if you have a wall, and I want to use your wall to lay down my lugs for my own ceiling, then the Prophet ﷺ, let him use it. Let him use it. The Prophet, some of the examples they said, Shufa is based on this, the right of preemption. The right of preemption is Shufa, and fiqh is based on this. What, do you know what's the right of preemption? If we are partners and I want to sell my share, partners, and we have common utilities. We have common utilities that we use. For the road to our, property is one road, and I want to sell my share, my partner has the right to preempt the sale and to take it for himself, because I should not cause harm to my partner by getting him a new one that he doesn't know if he will treat him well or not treat him well. So he has that right. If I dig my well in my property, very close to your well in your property, to draw the water from your well, I have not overstepped the limits. I am just using my property. If I kindle fire in my property, but the smoke will hurt you, I am not doing anything wrong. I am kindling fire on your property, but the smoke of the fire is hurting you. If I turn on my radio, for instance, and higher the voice, and even if that is Quran, and like in Egypt, it is. It could really, and here also. Allah, I lived in some places here where people turn on the music, but in Egypt, particularly if it is Quran, then you have this moral right to hire it as much as you want. If someone is sick, someone is studying, it's Quran. And then the people will be so embarrassed to tell you, well, can you just lower it a little bit? Because I want to sleep, I do listen to the Quran as well, but now I want to sleep. That is causing harm, right? Right or wrong, that's causing harm. I am kindling the fire on my property, but the smoke is hurting. So when the Prophet ﷺ said, if you eat onions or garlic, don't come to the masjid, it is just simply causing harm by the smell. Well, eating onions is halal, and didn't force you to eat onions. I'm not even eating onions in the masjid. I ate it at home, but I smell. So don't come to the masjid, so that you don't cause harm to other people. So here you're not sadistic. You're not even overstepping your limits. You're basically acting very innocently within your bounds, doing something in your property. But if it is causing harm, the harm has to be removed. even if you're doing work within your property, within your limits, within your bounds, the harm needs to be removed. To the point where if you eat onions, stay away, don't come to our masjid. Now, there is like another type of removing of harm that is even more ambitious, that is even greater, that is even more virtuous, more gracious. Where the Prophet ﷺ said, so not only that this is called being considerate, right? So if I prevent you from doing something that you're entitled to, but by your right, legal right, in your property, it is just being considerate. So that is, you're commanded to be considerate. Commanded to be considerate. So you're commanded to be fair, you're commanded to be considerate, and not only fair, but above this, you're commanded to be gracious. And in Abu Dawood, he reports that the Prophet ﷺ said, الناس شركاء في ثلاث أو ثلاثة قال يعني ثلاثة أمور. الناس شركاء في ثلاثة. People are co-owners of three things: الماء والنار والكلى. Water, fire, and pasture. Water, fire, and pasture. Water are co-owners of these three. So the scholars would say that if you have extra water, then you should pass it on to one who does not have extra water. You know, the communists and socialists in our countries, they use this to say that the Prophet ﷺ was basically socialist. No, but yes, whatever it is that is good in socialism, that has been pointed out. You know, there are certain concepts, but excessiveness, in socialism is certainly not something that the Prophet ﷺ says. Basically, when socialism, or when their version of socialism encroaches on individual rights, then no, Islam is not for that. But this hadith is very powerful, because he said that the people are co-owners of three things, and keep in mind that these three things to them were the most important things. You know, in the desert, water, pasture, fire. In their time, in their particular circumstances, environment, these three things are extremely important, the most important things. Communists, they do have a particular term for this. They call this what? Anyway, but those are the essential ingredients for any basically economic venture. Essential ingredients of any economic venture. During their time, these were the things. Now, the details of this, it is, it's like a very, very lengthy topic. It has many details. How is it that people are co-owners? When can you withhold these things, and when can you not withhold these things? But this mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ is very important to ponder, because it means that not only that you should be fair and you should not transgress and you should not compete viciously and you should not push people away, not only that you should be considerate and you should do things considerately even within your own bounds, within your own property, within your own confines, but also you must extend kindness. This is an obligation to extend kindness, and to act graciously. So you can't withhold water from someone who's thirsty, or, pasture, particularly if there's, we're talking about open land, public land. You can't prevent someone else's livestock from using the pasture in the public land, because people are co-owners. And it is also an address to the state, the Muslim state, that the Muslim state should provide for the poor, which is a concept called irfaq. Irfaq is kindness to the poor, being rafiq, being gentle to people who need that gentleness. And the concept of irfaq in Islamic economics is a great concept. They usually mention Umar ibn Khattab's saying to his agent, allow the owner of 1 or 2 sheep to use the public pasture of the Muslims that belongs to Bayt al-Mal, but don't let in the livestock of Uthman ibn Affan and Abdurrahman ibn Auf. So he pointed out, you remember we were talking about Uthman ibn Affan and Abdurrahman, no harm for a benefit or for no benefit, for a gain or no gain. And these are the 3 meanings. You know, just make a commitment that you will work on it, you will act on it to your best, that you will not cause harm to anyone. And that if you're in doubt, be the one to sacrifice. And don't be the one to expect people's sacrifice. عامل الناس بالفضل ولا تنتظر منهم إلا العدل. Treat people with graciousness, but don't expect of them except justice. So don't wait for graciousness from anyone. But when you treat the people, treat them with graciousness. Graciousness is always above justice. تعامل الناس بالفضل ولا تنتظر منهم إلا العدل. فإن لم يعدلوا فلا يجرمنكم شنآن قوم على ألا تعدلوا اعدلوا هو أقرب للتقوى. If they don't treat you justly, don't let people's enmity make you sway away from justice. Be just, for it is closer to piety. You be just. And if you want to also be better and greater in the sight of Allah, be gracious with the people that are not just to you. Not only just, but be gracious. ولا يأتل أولو الفضل منكم والسعة أن يؤتوا أولي القربى والمهاجرين في سبيل الله وليعفوا وليصفحوا ألا تحبون أن يغفر الله لكم والله غفور رحيم. And don't let those أولو الفضل والسعة. This is the story of Abu Bakr when he said that I will not spend on Mistah after Mistah speaking ill of Aisha and accusing her of enormity. And Abu Bakr said, I'm just not going to spend. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, you know, don't ever do this and don't ever withhold from being gracious because you are of ulul fadl. You are of the gracious people. People are expected to act graciously. والسعة and wealth. وَلْيَعْفُوا وَلْيَصْفَحُوا, and let them forgive and pardon. أَلَا تُحِبُّونَ أَن يَغْفِرَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ, don't you wish that Allah will forgive you? So basically, someone who did not treat you justly, someone who hurt you, that done you so much harm, don't only be just, but for someone like Abu Bakr. And if you want to be of that category of people, then go beyond justice and spend on them and be gracious. Because if you hold on to this and if you apply it, you will get so much, reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take you in as one of His special people. Make sure that we try to do this, all of us, make sure we try to do this. قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.